Yeah, crazy, right? So I'm standing there, barley wine all over my titties, and I gotta go. Call you back. Shut up. It's... What is going on, homebrewers and beer drinkers? Welcome back to Wolf King Brewing. I am your host, Liam Wynn, here in the flesh. It's been a few days, weeks maybe, since I've made a video, but I am back with another 10-day Brews episode for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at my 10-day Blackberry barley wine. Freaking gorgeous, isn't it? Now this was a really fun project for me. I have fun with all the 10-day brews because they're all kind of experimental and I get to mess around with new things that I'm not necessarily always well-versed or experienced in. Barley wine definitely falls in that category. I've actually never brewed a barley wine up until this one. It's a very polarizing beer style. You can hardly even call it beer to somebody who doesn't know what it is because it doesn't really taste a whole lot like beer, or at least what people think beer tastes like. When they think of beer, they don't think of this. If you're unfamiliar with the style, it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a wine-like beverage that is made from barley, like beer. And really, it shares a lot of characteristics with both. This has characteristics of strong ale, but it also bears certain characteristics of wine. And especially when you add a fruit like blackberry, you really start to see the wine side of things. It makes a really cool dichotomy. You get to see the two styles kind of playing and intermingling with each other in one glass. But for now, let's go back to the brew day. I'll talk about my recipe, my brewing process, and my fermentation schedule. I made a 2.5 gallon batch of this. I didn't want to make a full 5 gallons of it because it turned out to be 14.5% alcohol by volume, and I'm not going to drink that much of it because I will die. Now, you may or may not be surprised to know that to make a beer with this much alcohol, you need a lot of grain or a lot of sugar. I chose to go all malt for this. I actually didn't add any sugar at all. I can make a different video talking about the causes and effects of using sugar in a recipe to boost the alcohol, but really I didn't think it was necessary for this. I did use a 2-row base. A lot of people will turn to Maris Otter or something a little bit more flavorful, maybe a little darker for a barley wine. I just used 2-row because it's what I have here in bulk and it came out great. So a base of 7.5 pounds of 2-row pale malt, followed by 2 pounds of Mecca Great Estate Malt's Metolius malt. Now this is their Munich style malt. It's a little darker. It brings some cookie or cracker kind of characteristics. I also added 1/2 pound each of Gambrinus honey malt and Caramel 60. Now, the Caramel 60 obviously was mostly for color. I knew that the blackberry was going to add a little bit of color, but I did want it to get a little bit darker. I ended up sort of a deep ruby, kind of a brownish red color. It's beautiful. I like it a lot. But again, the honey malt and the caramel malt both work to add a little bit of extra sweetness and malt character to the base beer, as well as certain layers of complexity. And there you have my entire grain bill. It's a little over 10.5 pounds for 2.5 gallons. Moving into the mash, I went ahead and mashed my grains at 150 degrees for 75 minutes until I had reached my expected conversion efficiency. In terms of the water profile that I used here, I didn't do anything specific. In fact, I just threw in a teaspoon each of calcium chloride dihydrate and gypsum. Really, I just wanted some mineral content to add back into my reverse osmosis base, because this beer has so much else going on with the blackberry and the huge malt flavors that really, I just wanted some minerality in the water to kind of help balance things out, but a nice balanced water profile will do you just fine. After the mash was complete, I began my boil. Now, I did a lengthy boil for this beer. Many of you who've made barley wines before know that in order to get down to the concentration you need to get to that original gravity number, you gotta boil it for a while. I ended up doing a 2-hour boil with the following hop additions. For the full 2 hours, I boiled 15 grams of German Magnum hops. That alone is, somewhere between 45 and 50 IBUs. And I find that German Magnum gives me a very clean bitterness. With the last 5 minutes remaining of the boil, I did add an ounce of Cascade hops as well as another ounce of Cascade hops at flame out. I did want a little bit of the Cascade character, a little bit of citrus and pine just to back everything up. A lot of American style barley wines will be dry hopped or even more heavily hopped post-boil. I wasn't really shooting for that. I wanted this to be a little bit more balanced in terms of malt and dark fruit, from the blackberry, so I didn't worry too much about the hopping. That being said, I did bottle this beer, and I do plan to age most of the bottles for however long I can hang on to them. I'll probably do another tasting video in 3 months, 6 months, a year, and see how this beer develops over time. A lot of hop aromas are just going to be driven off at that point, and they're not going to be around anymore. So dry hopping, it would have good results fresh, especially for a 10-day beer like this. But in this case, I just decided to forego it. After my boil was complete and I checked and confirmed that I had reached my original gravity of a whopping 1103, god damn. It was like syrup at this point. It was so thick and goopy. Goopy's not the most scientific word. Viscous. It was viscous. I had a little over 2.5 gallons starting at that 1103 gravity, knowing full well that I was going to let that ferment to my final gravity, and then I was going to add my blackberry puree, and that was going to boost my gravity back up and add a few more points. So there's a very simple way to do the math on the actual alcohol by volume here. I'll go over that more in a second. But I pitched one packet of Lallemand Voss Kveik yeast. Didn't rehydrate it, I just dumped it straight into the fermenter, shook it up a little bit, threw in a couple teaspoons of the BSG Fermax yeast nutrient just to make sure this yeast had everything it needed to get going quickly, and apparently it did, because it did. Within 2 hours, I had massive airlock activity, just rapid fire bubbles coming out of the airlock. In less than 48 hours, I had no discernible airlock activity, and my beer was completely still. So I took a gravity reading, and I was found to be at 1022, so pretty close to where I expected my final gravity to be, and I figured, you know what, it tastes good already. I tasted it and it didn't taste super green or young. It didn't taste like it had much more fermentation to do. So I figured what better time to add the fruit. As far as fruit, there's many different ways you can do this. I'll probably make a video just going over different ways to add fruit to beer in general. In this case, I'll just talk about what I used here, which was this stuff, this Monine puree. This is very similar. I've never used this brand before, but I have used the Amaretti craft purees, which are, I think, pretty commonly used in brewing. This is basically just concentrated fruit and sugar. So basically this is blackberry syrup. This is very useful for cocktails and things like that. It's very high in sugar content, so I had to be careful how much I added so as not to boost my alcohol by volume out of the freaking world. But I gotta tell you, this stuff worked really well in imparting a strong blackberry character on this beer. I used half of this 1 liter bottle, so I measured out 500 milliliters and added that directly to the primary fermenter after primary fermentation had completed, and then I let that re-ferment out again to completion. I did take a gravity reading after adding the puree and mixing it well, and I found that it had bumped my gravity by 14 points. So I went from 1022 back up to 1036. So I just took those 14 points and I added them to my original gravity measurement, which was 1103, to give me my pseudo original gravity reading of 1117, and then I would use that to do the equation of, you know, alcohol by volume. So my final gravity after the fruit had re-fermented was 1019. So I plugged 1117 and 1019 into my equation to get the 14.56% alcohol by volume. That'll vary depending on which equation you use, but that's a very simple way to determine how much sugar was added during fermentation. It's trickier if you're using actual fruit, because you won't always get an accurate gravity reading right after dumping a bunch of fresh fruit into your fermenter. But with the puree, it's extremely easy because it pretty much goes into solution. So once it dissolves in my solution, then I can take a gravity reading and tell exactly how much sugar was added. Pro tips for you here on the Wolf King Brewing channel. You're welcome. At that point, 6 days into the process, the thing was terminal. It was completely still. I had no airlock activity, no yeast activity, and it was tasting wonderful. So at this point, I went ahead and kegged up the 2.5 gallons that I had of finished product. And in order to carbonate this, I know that I didn't want too much carbonation. A barley wine would, by style, pretty traditionally have lower carbonation by volume anyways. It's just more pleasant to drink. You don't want this to be super fizzy or effervescent at all. You just want it to have a nice, a little bit of carbonic bite, a little bit of carbonic acid in here to kind of bring all the flavors up into the nose and to accentuate and kind of cut through some of the malt sweetness, because this beer is pretty thick. So a little bit of carbonation, I didn't measure it. There was no science involved in this. I tend to use a burst carbonation method that is pretty non-specific, but I just set it to 40 PSI for the 2.5 gallons and left my regulator attached and left it at 40 PSI for 5 hours. And that gave me a really nice, really mellow carbonation. Again, no exact science. Your mileage may vary depending on your regulator, accuracy, the pressure you set it to, etc., etc. If you want more consistent results, just consult a carbonation chart and do it the slow way. But this 10-day brews, we don't have time for that. We do things the quick way. And somehow I don't get bitten in the ass every single time. That's really it, man. I mean, I like this beer a lot. I don't like every beer that I brew, believe it or not, but I do like this. Barley wine is super divisive. I mean, people who like barley wine usually like it a lot and really appreciate it, but you'll find a lot of craft beer drinkers and beer enthusiasts, beer nerds, if you will, that actually hate barley wine and won't drink it. And that's because, again, this just goes against what people picture when they picture a beer. This is not bright or it's fruity, but the fruit character is dark, kind of earthy fruits. I get raspberry, blackberry, some stone fruits like cherries, a little bit of like nectarine, some plum for sure. I get a lot of dark fruit character in this. The blackberry is evident. I mean, you know, it's almost sort of has like a cocktail type thing going on because it is very boozy, and as it warms up, you do get a little bit of acetone, a little bit of ethanol, especially on the nose. But it's not unpleasant. You know, it almost works like a cocktail in that way. So I'm really happy with how this came out, honestly. And if anything, this is just a testament to how much of an absolute monster this yeast is. I mean, this stuff can do anything. One packet, 2.5 gallons, pitched it straight, no rehydration. It ripped right through it. It ripped right through it. So that's it. If you guys have any questions, drop them in the comment section below. I wish I could have you all try this. This is such an interesting beer. You know, it's got so many unique flavors. It's kind of aggressive almost, but it's, to me, I find it very pleasant and very drinkable, especially if you're drinking slow, and pretty much only if you're drinking slow. I don't know what would happen if I chugged this, but I don't think it'd be pleasant. But it's such an interesting and complex beer, and I'm excited to mess around more with barley wines in the future and see what I can come up with. That's it. That's really it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers. I didn't actually have barley wine on my titties, by the way. I didn't.